Welcome to the latest episode of the Create Smarter podcast. I am Phil DiMartino, joined today with Jake Steiner and Connor Clordy. Gentlemen, how are you today?
Doing good.
Doing good.
That's great.
Yeah.
Well,
as
we
good
got.
as I could do with all the pollen in the air.
There's pollen abounding all around us today, but that's not what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about thought leadership at events and how to make the most of events once the event is over in terms of the content you captured there. And this is something that we've been talking about at 5Tool for years and years and years in terms of making the most of events and not letting it just be what happens live on site, but making the content captured at events help your company or your brand or whatever it is live on beyond that event and spread the word and get people engaged and involved well beyond, when people leave the venue. So both of you guys have spent a lot of time at events recently. What's your favorite city that you've been to, I guess?
That's tough. That's a tough one.
I wouldn't say what's your least favorite, but what's your favorite city that you got to go to recently?
Recently, you can't say anything bad about Vegas. Vegas is cool. It's going there for work is real cool. Going to the Sphere, seeing the F1 track being set up, and just kind of the vibe that Vegas was really cool. And I got to stay at Caesar's Palace, which was like a dream of mine. So
well, there you go.
Off the bucket list. Nice.
Check.
Austin.
Yes.
Austin is still by far. It's just amazing. It's just amazing. Can't beat it. 6th Street. It's a grand old time. Dueling pianos, all the fun stuff there. I would love to go back to Austin.
Great thing about working in events is that people generally try to hold events in cities that people actually want to go to. So when you work events, you often end up in cities that people want to go to. The downside is often working very long days and don't actually get to enjoy those cities.
That's true. Yeah, I would have said Kansas City, but I didn't leave the building. I don't even know what Kansas City is like, and I stayed there for 4 days.
Just rode from the airport directly to the venue, and then
bed,
3 full days. Exactly. Well, while you're at these events, part of the reason you're doing such long days is you're capturing tons and tons of content with the people who are there. Connor, you've been working events basically since you started here with us. What are the common factors you see about talking to people at events? People are often in a really good mood being there. What are some of the commonalities you see when you talk to people at events in terms of what you get out of them and maybe why it's a good opportunity to think about content capture as opposed to doing it, between meetings in your office on a random Tuesday? Like, what are some of the things you see as benefits and some of the common things you've seen at some of these events that you've worked?
Yeah, it's interesting, especially looking back from when I started to now. I think I was going in kind of like I'd never seen a conference, heard of a conference, known anyone who went to a conference like the ones that we go to. So talking to the people directly, the attendees and some of the people from the organization is really interesting because you see this niche side of the world that you've never interacted with. And you learn all about it within the week when you see how much the attendees enjoy being around each other and actually learning. And they're very excited to see what the thought leaders and the professionals in the industry have to say to them and teach them so they can take it back to their office or their organization. And that's kind of what really stuck with me through all of them, is just seeing the passion from the attendees and how much they love being around each other, networking. And I think you talk about content capture, whether that's capturing the stage, pulling a couple of attendees aside, getting interviews, maybe recording a podcast, whatever it is. And that's kind of like lightning in a bottle. You have to capture that passion while you're while you're there. And as you know, it's easier done than said, actually, for once, because they want to talk about it. They want to sit down with somebody who wants to hear them. I mean, when they go back to their office, they might not be the number one. They might be just sit behind a desk. So when they're around others who know what they go through, the pains and the fun parts of the job, they want to sit down and talk to you about it. And that's the kind of content and the kind of people you want to touch base with and talk to.
Yeah, and they're in this unique mindset where they are charged up and they're focused on like the high level, the strategy, the theoretical, in a way where if you catch them in their day-to-day, like I said, between meetings, it's like people are, buried down in the tactical of their jobs and a million emails. And it's like when you catch someone at an event, you really are, you said lightning in a bottle. You're getting this kind of creative, high energy where people are having fun. They're together with people who are also excited to be there about this like professional development topic. They're hearing from interested speakers. It's like there is a different energy there than when you just go to a random conference
100%.
room. And you also mentioned like the little niche corners of the world. Jake, I know you've had the chance to go to some of these events that are really focused. Was your experience similar in terms of talking to people who are like all excited to see a speaker who's really big in this space, maybe wouldn't register in other spaces, but the idea that these thought leaders matter, right, in these specific spaces. Did you experience that as well in some of the events you've been to?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, it's cool to see, people who may work a desk job, day-to-day type of job, kind of get to geek out over their true passion.
Yeah.
It's electric. That energy specifically, like if you truly want to capture the emotion of the event, you need to speak to people while they're at that event, because like you said, they go back to their day-to-day job and it's not there. But, to truly have these thought leaders, these, whatever it may be, whatever niche community it may be, have these kind of top of the food chain people there, and having them all under the same roof and being able to capture all of these people in the room together and being able to sit down with these thought leaders and listen to these thought leaders. Like I said, it is really, really special, and you kind of get that emotion. You get that secondhand kind of geeking out over these thought leaders and these individuals that you've never heard of prior to this event, or whatever event you are capturing, and it's always very, very fun and very, very cool.
I think one of the things that's always telling to me is you're at an event, and whether it's like a main stage session or a breakout room, and again, we're not coming from a point of being in these spaces. So like you said, we might not be acquainted with the speakers, but someone goes up on stage and they talk for 30 minutes or an hour. They get a lot out. The point is they talk a lot, but then when they get off stage, almost inevitably there's a line of people lined up ready to ask questions of them, because it's like that person has keys to unlock success in my own field, and I want to get that out of them so I can bring it back to my work and be a superstar and
100%.
Get a raise and advance and go get the next job and whatever it is. So like when I go to higher ed conferences, it's the same thing. There's always people who are there who are like, oh, the superstars, and people are like, oh, that person knows what they're talking about. Those are the people we're talking about capturing content with and capitalizing, because sure, you can provide that at the event, but if you can bottle that up and provide it after the event, it's even more valuable in terms of keeping folks engaged and keeping them coming back. So lots of different ways to do this. One of the most basic tried and true methods we mentioned is that kind of reporter mentality, the man on the street and pulling people aside. And, Jake, you've been in a position recently at a bunch of different events, ranging from, seafood conventions to, career fairs to really specific kind of educational events for people in specific industries. What kind of things do you see from our perspective? How do you approach it when you go and you talk to someone, knowing, yes, I want to put together a highlight reel, but also what I want to do is put together some really specific content after the event? How do you approach interviews, and how does that process work from a production side? Like, why is it more valuable to do it in that setting for you than it would be, if we tried to plan shoots, independently of an event?
Yeah, no, it's when you see the attendees running around, like it's actually can be kind of difficult to pull them to the side, because they're so tunnel visioned on getting to this breakout room and in the main stage here, and being able to hear from this speaker, that speaker, that speaker. But I mean, it's 100% what Connor was saying. There is a different energy that they will have in that specific setting. So being able to pull them out from that setting while they still have that adrenaline kind of kick going through them, and they have all these minds around them that all kind of think the same or in the same, same world. There is something to that you can't get if we say, hey, I know you attended this event, a month later, and be like, hey, let me, ask you about how that experience was. What did you think? What did you like? What did you not like? Now, there is something so different about pulling them to the side, be like, hey, so spontaneously, they go into the day not realizing what's going to happen. They never expect to get pulled to the side or interviewed that day. So spontaneously kind of pulling them to the side, capturing that raw emotion, capturing those raw feelings and thoughts is amazing. And that truly makes for the best content when it comes to these events, because of just the pure raw emotion.
Connor, as an interviewer, I know when I'm in this setting, I find myself almost being like, I want to cram in as much as possible. Do you find yourself kind of creating videos in your mind as you're talking to them? Oh, I could make a video about this. I could make a video about this. Do you find yourself as an interviewer kind of going down that path of like trying to get as many different lines of questioning in as possible, knowing like, oh, we don't necessarily have a plan for this, but they're going down a path, and we could make that video. Do you find yourself kind of going into that producer mode when you're on site in this role?
Yeah, definitely. I think you can't help it. And one thing I would say, it's as an interviewer, it's very helpful when you have a good partnership with the client. I think conferences in general are a great time for production teams and the client to have a partnership. And I mean that in deliverables, going to what the questions are asking, what videos you're making, and the questions you're going to ask. We could sit around and three guys could come up with basic questions about a conference. How'd you like the conference? How'd you hear about it? Are you going to come back next year? Awesome. Have a good lunch. But it's good to have a partnership with the client who knows what they want to hear from the attendees so that we can use our interviewing skills and whatnot to make a good video out of that. That being said is, to the client side as well, don't just use all this content to just make a highlight reel, And that's well and good, don't get me wrong. It's always great to have that in the back pocket so you can say, look how much fun this year was, can't wait to see you next year. That's great. But while you're talking to it, we kind of were like, oh, this speaker knows a lot about this stuff. And this attendee, I saw them having a really good time at networking. And that attendee, I saw really, writing down a lot of notes during a session. Let's talk to them about education and the learning aspect of this. And I think there's a lot of different videos that can come out of one conference and either one interview as well. So I always look for that kind of stuff. And like I said, it all goes back to partnerships, because while you're on site, you can mention to the client, hey, I'm not telling you, what's going to happen afterwards, but that guy had a great sound clip about education. This lady had a good sound clip about networking, and I think there's a lot to do with it there.
Yeah, and I think you're making the point, which is like step one is capturing content at an event that's about the event, which is to say, we're going to use this to promote next year's event, whether it's to try to get more exhibitors back or to get more attendees to sign up or to explain to people like why it's good to come to this event. But then step two, which once you build a relationship with a client, it's easier to explain this to them, is creating content that's going to be used year round. And, we have some clients who have gotten really good at this to say, we know the energy is there. We know the people are there. Let's use this as an opportunity, more of just like that media day feel, which is to say, we know there are 5 people who can talk about this specific topic that people in our industry want to learn more about. Let's ask them a bunch of questions about this so we can push out content. If the event's in January, we can push out content in February, March, April, and May, all about this topic that's top of mind for people. And, our organization is going to, position itself really well to all of these attendees as someone who matters, right? So that it's the same type of thing as we talk about in fundraising. Don't just ask for money, show the value. It's the same thing with events. Don't just tell people to come to your event, show the value. And I think
exactly, yeah.
The more you can do that, obviously the better. One of the companies that does, or one of the events that does a really good job about this that our colleague Tyler always talks about is Inbound. Inbound has a little side stage, right, where we'll talk about with podcasts in a second, but they basically, it's one thing to go up and deliver a speech, but then they kind of pull people off to the side and they have kind of a secondary stage. We're looking at it here with podcasts. What's the difference between long form in that setting and kind of conversational, and what kind of content do you get out of somebody in a thought leader in that conversational setting versus chopped up in an interview? Like, how do you feel like that's different, and why is it beneficial to maybe get people in that long form medium as opposed to that kind of more stand up interview setting? Like, what do you get out of it, do you say?
I think if I could start, it's interesting thinking about it in those two ways. If you're on social media, if you're scrolling through LinkedIn, if you're going through Instagram, whatever that may be, I think that's easier to see, I know this is a promotional material for next year, but let me just listen to what they have to say, the attendees. And that's kind of where the bigger sound bites, oh, this is really great. I love the network. I love the education. A couple shots. Here's the link for the tickets. Awesome. And that definitely works. But when you transition into more of like a fireside chat, if you have a notable person, a notable name, a notable voice that people want to stick around and listen to what they have to say, like you said, they have the keys. And one thing if you went to the event and weren't able to go to their session. A second thing, if you didn't know they were at the event and you want to go next year, see them or whatever, this is a great opportunity to sit them down in a less, I don't know if the word's formal, but someone's on a stage versus 100 people in the audience is one thing. Sitting them down with one person who really wants to talk to them and using this as social clips, using it as a long video, as a podcast, whatever that may be, it opens up the keynote speaker as well, whoever, for example. To go more in depth in some things. I mean, they have only a time limit when they're on stage, so sitting down for a more conversational, less interview style thing is a great opportunity to really hear what they have to say about the topic.
Yeah, and I think that's 100%. You get rid of that time limit per se. Like instead of having this keynote speaker or having whoever and kind of forcing them and holding them in within a 30-minute, speech limit. And like you said, these are the thought leaders of their industries. They have so much to talk about. They have so much that they want people to know. Having those longer form interactions and far less formal, far less standing in front of some slides and going through and pacing from one side. Maybe sit them down, let them relax, let them get comfortable. You draw out so much information, and with all this new information that you're drawing out that you may not get from the speech, and you're allowing them to truly, speak what's on their mind, that just generates more content. And realistically, the more content obviously extends the life of the event, extends the reach of the event. So it really is it's an important thing, to not only have a keynote on stage talk or pulling them aside for a 3-minute interview, but give them another platform. Give them all the platforms that you provide them within your event.
And, I think about you guys in the context of event attendees. You went to an event in September together last year. In our industry, as you got to see it from the other side as attendees. And there's always simultaneous events happening and things like that. As an attendee, you can't see everything, right? And as an event organizer, your goal is data collection and, making your sponsors happy. So let's say you go to the event and maybe you go to a session. You're like, it didn't really hit the mark. And, I went to that one instead of, this one with this other person that I went to. If that event serves you up content after the fact that says, hey, just drop in your email address and, you can get this exclusive interview from the event with this person that you might have missed. You're providing them more data about what you're interested in so they can sell to you. That person who's there is going to get it's a huge benefit to the event organizer to keep you engaged and keep learning more about you and keep you on the hook because you're going to engage with stuff that maybe you didn't get a chance to at the event as well. So from that side of things, you can see, there's benefit to following up with event attendees beyond just, and it also makes it more likely you'll go back because you're like, oh, not only did I have a good experience at the event, but they followed up with me and I got more out of it once I left.
Yeah.
I want to talk a little bit about podcasts. We talked about the fireside chat. Connor, you've done a good amount of this on site now. In addition to, we have this room here that's kind of our beta stage where we can set it up and run things ourselves. What's the experience been like for you on site at podcasts, just on site doing podcasts? Just kind of walk me through and describe what it's like and, what are some of the space requirements and people might be surprised to know what you can get done on site. In relatively small spaces.
You kind of read my mind there. I was going to say the first thing that came to mind is it doesn't take much. I kind of went in being like doing a podcast on flying across the country, doing a podcast, setting it up in a hallway. I don't know. But then you show up and you kind of see the space you have. And all you need is, a table, enough for 2 mics, a camera, and, some lights. And really that's it. It's a really small footprint. And that's more for the client side of you don't have to worry about renting a whole meeting room just to have a couple, recorded podcasts. Yes, sound is an issue, but there's a way to work around that. But I was surprised how light of a footprint it really was. And how well received it was. Even, you go into a conference and you might have 6 podcasts scheduled throughout the week. I got a keynote speaker here. I got a really good attendee here. I have a board, advisory board member that's coming in that are going to say a few words. But as people walk by, if you set it up right, if you have, a nice logo, if people can see you doing it, it's really interesting how the attendees are like, oh, what's going on here? I want to be involved. I want to know. And then if you do have the time, if you're giving them the opportunity to, come on in, open door, come sit down, ask a few questions, answer a few words, that's even better because you go in, like I said, having 6, you come out with 15, and that gives you more content throughout the year. So I think that's one thing that really impressed me is how small the footprint was and how, I was sitting in the room, but you don't need a whole team. So that's for the client. It's cheaper than having a whole production thing. So I don't think it's as big as a lift as some people might think it is.
And, you talk about the draw on site. There's massive opportunities for a couple of different angles. Make sure that you tell people how to subscribe. If you have an existing podcast, how do you subscribe to listen on Spotify or wherever they listen?
Yeah.
And then it's also an it's an opportunity for co-sponsorship, right? If you are turning it into this little event, exhibitors are always looking for opportunities to have their name, front and center. You think about going to an event, the lanyard is sponsored when people wear badges. The program is sponsored.
Yeah, the bag.
The bag is sponsored. The podcast booth, if it's being captured, is a huge opportunity to say, hey, sponsor, we want to put your name on this as a presenting sponsor with all of these smart people talking about topics that matter.
Oh, yeah.
Your name is going to be associated with it throughout. I mean, that's a huge opportunity as well. You also mentioned the audio quality. Jake, I know you've both spent a lot of time with it, but Jake, talk about some of the ways that gets cleaned up in post. It's not This isn't 10 years ago or 20 years ago when, garbage in, garbage out from an audio collection. There's a lot we can do in post to clean those up as well. Do your best and have good equipment, but there's a lot we can do in post and that AI can do to help with that too.
Yeah, absolutely. We're always, anytime we're capturing audio with clients, like it's if they hear something, they might be like, ooh, like there's a fan in the room, like is that, and it's not to say it's not a problem. Like we're always trying to avoid these things. We're not actively being like, no, it's fine. But I mean, with today, it's one click. It has gotten so incredibly impressive what the programs can do in terms of cleaning up audio. We use Adobe, and every day there's a new update. Just the other day there was one where it just so user-friendly but so instant, and it cleans it up and it makes everything sound podcast quality. And it always blows my mind, even being in this field and hearing it. But, in the setting where we see it all the time when we do our events, like it is a table in a hallway is really what it comes down to.
Yeah.
It is a table in a hallway, and you're walking by it and you're loud and you hear all the people around you, and then you hear the audio afterwards, and it's it is crystal clear. So it is always very impressive, but it makes it so doable in today's world. Like you said, the footprint can be so small. It can be in the open.
It can be in the exhibit hall.
Absolutely.
20 years ago, that wasn't the case. I think about the way we were recording sound before, and again, you want it to be as clean as possible. But also, recording live from an event, people expect there to be some degree of background chatter, but it used to be, we need that 10 seconds of room tone. We're going to capture that print, and we're going to be able to strip some of that background noise out now with the tools that exist, that are integrated into tools like Premiere. Sometimes we have to scale back the amount of correction because they're like, this sounds too good.
It's actually uncanny
for the setting, and it makes people think that it's fake even when it's not.
But I think it does. Just one last point is, I think as a producer, it gives you the confidence. I think I'm thinking of Vegas specifically. I walked in, and it wasn't a hallway, but the client had thought ahead about that. They said, I know this is right outside the lunchroom. It's going to be busy. So they constructed a mini studio. And it was kind of like, not glass, but plastic walls you can see through. So like I said, you can see it happening. It was really cool kind of behind the scenes. But it was a good sound barrier. That also meant that all the sound kind of went in through the top and couldn't escape. So I was sitting down, setting up. I'm like, this is going to be crazy. Like, I don't know.
Bouncing around a
little
bit.
But, taking 5 seconds as a producer to go through the board, see what you can do with the noise-canceling headphones. There's little tiny variables that you can switch that gives you a little more confidence. And, as the client comes in and you're talking to them, you can say to them, hey, don't worry about that. Yep, thought about that. Here, put the headphones on, give them a little, sound check just to make sure. And then, going into post, it gives you confidence. Okay, I've already done as much as I can to eliminate that sound. Let me make it sound as best I can on post.
You mentioned going into post, and I think I wanted to ask you just one or two more quick questions. There's full episodes of podcasts, but podcasts are also a great opportunity for that thought leadership content to get out on LinkedIn and other social media channels as well. What are some of the approaches you've seen in the work you've done, Connor, with podcast recorded on site, but also podcast recorded generally, in terms of social promotion and how you get that content out there to people who maybe aren't subscribed or who don't care to listen to a 30-minute recording?
Yeah, I would say there's two big things that you can do. I think just surfing the internet on different apps and different social medias. I think podcasts are one of the biggest clippable things ever. I think some people might sit down with the purpose of clipping. And out of your conference, if you, like I said, have 6 but record 15, whatever, that one episode could have 3 clips. Just depends on how good the interview is. And that clip is very important because you can do it in real digestible sound bites that are short. You can put that on Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn, whatever your biggest following is. My second point is if you do have a notable name, if you have a niche influencer, if you have someone who has a following, utilize that following. You give them a clip, you give them a folder full of clips, and say, hey, whenever you feel like it, if you're making a LinkedIn post about how much fun you had at this event, you were honored to be a keynote speaker, do you mind just slipping our post in there too? And that just shows you using someone else's pre-existing audience will might funnel back to yours, and you'll see that next year.
And we've talked about this with some of our podcast clients, Jake, and you've been part of these conversations too. Building an audience is great. It's really hard to build an audience in the podcast space, and it takes a lot of time. But in the meantime, exposure and awareness, especially if you're, promoting events, that in and of itself can be a reasonable goal too. And these short clips can go a long way towards helping you achieve that.
Yeah, I mean, 50 listeners puts you at an elite level in the podcasting world. Like, and it's tough, I think, for a lot of people to truly wrap their head around that. Like, it is very difficult to capture an audience, maintain an audience in the podcasting world. However, there's so much. There's a niche communities that we were talking about, and you really truly only need to capture the ears of maybe one or two of people within that 50.
It's the right listeners.
It is always going to be the right listeners. It's quality over quantity, truly.
Right.
When you get those quality listeners and you get those quality possible attendees who end up coming to your event purely for the soundbite they heard on Instagram or TikTok, whatever it may be, it has done its job.
Yeah.
It has done exactly what you set it out to do. That's what it truly comes down to is you don't need to have the $5,000 person listening audience. It doesn't need to be that. It's just truly hitting the right listeners.
Yeah, I think expectations versus reality in the podcast space is very important.
Yeah.
You're not going to set up a podcast today and overnight be, in the top 10 in the charts, but that doesn't need to be your goal.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing I would say is, don't reinvent the wheel. You mentioned using your influencers networks, use your own networks,
Yeah.
Build up your following in multiple places and don't just depend on a Spotify subscriptions, but podcasts can be a really good way to feed those networks with consistent content to build up your audience in multiple places. Any other final thoughts from you guys about thought leadership on-site at events before we hit the road here today?
No, I think you not reinventing the wheel is a good thing. Keep it fun, keep it exciting, and if you keep it fun and exciting, and you have people there who are willing to capture the audio and the video of the event, it will sell itself. It's truly lightning in the bottle. That's the term for this podcast for sure, 100%. So you want to capture it while you're there for sure.
And I would say, to anyone listening, it's not as hard as you think it's going to be. I don't think it's as big as a lift. Saying that from a production standpoint, just because we do it, but also, like I said, a footprint for something like this could be small, whether that's stage capture or a podcast, something like that. And like I said, it's not hard because the people going want to speak about it. They want to talk about how much fun they had, how much, because they paid to be there and they want to get the ROI, and the ROI is there. It's real. And I just don't think it's as hard as it is, and I think you're missing out if you don't capitalize on that.
Don't reinvent the wheel. It's not as hard as you think it is. You can't start until you start, so do something at your next event. Thank you for listening to the Create Smarter podcast. I'm Phil with Jake and Connor. Thanks so much for listening, and we will see you next time.